300 meters below the Atlantic, sound just stopped. No sonar, no engine hum, just silence. And in that silence, Captain Carter's crew started hearing something far worse than nothing. They heard each other's thoughts. The Atlantic Ocean had swallowed sound before, but never like this. Captain William Ironhand Carter gripped the steel railing of the USS Scorpion's command deck, his knuckles white against the cold metal. The submarine cut through dark water at 280 meters, and everything seemed routine. The engine hummed its familiar rhythm. Sonar pinged every 12 seconds. Men spoke in low voices about coffee, wives, the World Series. Then at 14:03 hours, reality broke. The sonar operator, Jenkins, pressed his headphones tighter against his ears. His face went pale. "Captain, the pings aren't coming back." Carter stepped toward the sonar station. "Equipment malfunction?" "No, sir. The system's working. It's sending signals, but nothing's returning. It's like—" Jenkins pulled off his headphones, his hands shaking slightly. "It's like there's nothing out there to bounce off of." "Check it again." Jenkins typed commands into the console. The screen showed active transmission. Green waves pulsed outward from the submarine's position. But where there should have been return echoes, seafloor, rock formations, thermal layers, there was only flat silence. Carter opened his mouth to give another order. No sound came out. He tried again. His lips moved, his throat worked, but the air carried nothing. Around the command deck, other men were experiencing the same impossible thing. The engineer pointed frantically at his mouth. The navigator stood frozen, his lips forming words that died instantly. The engine still vibrated through the hull. They could feel it in their feet, in their bones, but they couldn't hear it anymore. Carter's training kicked in despite the surging panic in his chest. He grabbed a grease pencil from the navigation table and wrote on the metal wall in large letters, "Stay calm, writing only." But even as he wrote it, something else was happening. Something worse than silence. A voice whispered inside his head, not his own voice, someone else's. "Radiation leak in compartment 3. We're all going to die. Why isn't anyone doing anything?" Carter spun around. The voice belonged to Jenkins. He was staring at the sonar screen, his face twisted with terror, but his lips weren't moving. The voice was coming from inside Carter's mind. More voices followed. A flood of them. "My wife's letter said she's leaving. She's taking the kids. I can't focus. I can't. Should have reported that valve yesterday. If it blows. Now it's my fault. They'll court-martial me. Carter doesn't trust me. I can see it in his eyes. He knows I lied about the incident in Norfolk." The voices overlapped, tangled, screamed. Carter pressed his palms against his temples. Around him, the crew was doing the same. Men dropped to their knees. Some covered their ears, useless against sounds that originated inside their skulls. The navigator, Miller, suddenly lunged toward Jenkins. His face was contorted with rage. He grabbed Jenkins by the collar and slammed him against the sonar console. His mouth moved. Carter couldn't hear what Miller was trying to say, but he heard Miller's thoughts perfectly. "You told them about the drinking. You reported me. You ruined my career. I'll kill you." Carter pulled Miller off Jenkins, throwing him backward. He grabbed the grease pencil again and wrote on the wall, "Everyone stop thinking. Clear your minds." But how do you stop thinking? Jenkins wrote below Carter's message, "Captain, this is impossible. What's happening?" Carter didn't know. In 23 years of naval service, he'd never encountered anything like this. Underwater acoustic phenomena, sure. Dead zones where sonar failed, absolutely. But this was something else entirely. The submarine was still moving forward, still following its programmed course through what the charts called Grid Reference AX40. Carter had never heard of anything unusual about this sector. Standard Atlantic waters. Depth, 300 meters. Temperature, 4 degrees Celsius. Nothing remarkable. Except sound had stopped existing, and minds had become broadcasts. Carter wrote new orders on the wall. "Navigate by instruments only. Maintain heading 270. I'm going to the chart room." He moved through the submarine's narrow corridors, his boots silent on the metal deck. Men pressed themselves against the walls as he passed, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. He heard all of their thoughts as he walked. Is this Russian technology? Some kind of weapon? God, please, make it stop. I can't stand hearing everyone. They all hate me. If we surface now, will the silence end? Or are we trapped? In the chart room, Carter spread the navigation maps across the table. Grid AX-40 was marked with standard notation. Nothing unusual. He checked the mission logs. Previous submarines had passed through this sector dozens of times without incident. So what had changed? The answer came from an unexpected source. Carter heard a thought that wasn't from any of his crew. It was distant, faint, like a radio signal from far away, and it was speaking Russian. День 14, кислород заканчивается. Мы не можем кричать о помощи. Carter's Russian was limited, but he understood enough. Day 14. Oxygen running out. Can't scream for help. Someone else was in the silence zone. Someone who'd been here for 2 weeks. Carter rushed back to the command deck. He wrote on the wall, "There's another vessel nearby. Soviet. In distress. Can anyone else hear foreign thoughts?" Several crew members nodded frantically. Jenkins wrote, "Yes, Russian words. Very faint. They're dying." Carter made a decision that would define everything that followed. He wrote, "We're going to find them." The navigator immediately wrote back, "Sir, if we deviate from mission, HQ will court-martial you, and they're Soviets." Carter underlined his previous message harder. "We're going to find them." Because in the silence, Carter had heard something else in those Russian thoughts. Not just words, emotions, terror, desperation, the same things his own crew was feeling. And beneath it all, a simple truth. They were all just men trapped underwater, regardless of flags or politics. The sonar was useless, but thermal imaging still worked. Carter ordered a slow, spiral search pattern, looking for heat signatures that didn't belong to natural ocean life. 3 hours passed in silent hell. The crew's thoughts grew darker with each passing minute. Paranoia spread like poison through the submarine. Men accused each other of betrayals that existed only in imagination. Old grudges surfaced. Secrets spilled into everyone's minds uninvited. Carter heard it all, the affairs, the stolen supplies, the fears and hatreds and desperate longings, every human weakness laid bare. Ensign Cooper was having an affair with Lieutenant Morrison's wife. Carter heard both their thoughts simultaneously, Cooper's guilt, Morrison's oblivious trust. Chief Mechanic Rodriguez had been skimming money from the ship's supply budget for 6 months. His thoughts were a constant loop of justification and fear of discovery. Petty Officer Barnes had lied about his medical clearance. His heart condition should have disqualified him from submarine duty. Now his thoughts screamed with regret every time his chest tightened, and Carter heard his own crew hearing his thoughts too. His doubts about command, his recurring nightmares about the men who'd died under his orders 3 years ago, his fear that he'd make another fatal mistake. In the silence zone, there were no secrets, no lies, no comfortable distance between souls, just raw, terrible truth. Then the thermal sensors found something, a shape, roughly submarine-sized, stationary, 400 meters to the north, resting on the seafloor at 340 meters depth. Carter ordered a cautious approach. As they drew closer, the foreign thoughts grew stronger, more desperate. «Воздух такой тонкий. Капитан мертв 3 дня. Никто не приходит. Мы съели последнюю еду вчера». The air so thin. Captain dead 3 days. No one coming. We ate the last food yesterday. Through the Scorpion's forward viewport, they finally saw it. A Soviet Whiskey-class submarine lying on its side on the ocean floor. Its hull was intact, no visible damage. But it wasn't moving, wasn't running, just sitting in the dark, slowly dying. Carter's executive officer, Commander Pierce, grabbed a notepad and wrote furiously, "Captain, we cannot help them. This is a Soviet military vessel. If we make contact, it's an international incident. If we rescue them, it's treason. We have to leave." Carter took the notepad and wrote back, "They're submariners. That's all that matters." Pierce wrote again, his handwriting jagged with stress. "Sir, I'm begging you. Think about your career, your family. This will destroy you. Carter looked at Pierce for a long moment, then he wrote, "Some things are more important than careers." The question was how to help them. The Scorpion couldn't physically tow another submarine. They didn't have rescue equipment for this depth. And even if they could establish communication, what would they say? What could they say in a place where sound was dead? Carter closed his eyes and tried to think clearly through the chaos of voices in his head. Then he realized something crucial. If he could hear their thoughts, could they hear his? He focused his mind, imagining his thoughts as a transmission, directed and deliberate. He pictured the Soviet submarine, pictured the men inside, and he thought, as clearly as he could, "This is Captain Carter of the USS Scorpion. We see you. We're going to help you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a response came back, shaky and disbelieving. "Amerikanец. Вы настоящий. Это галлюцинация." American, are you real? Is this hallucination? Carter thought back. Real. We're real. How many crew alive? 7. Oxygen. Maybe 5 hours. Maybe less. 5 hours. Carter checked the chronometer. They'd been in the silence zone for 3 hours and 47 minutes. His own air supply was still good for another 48 hours, but every minute in this place was psychological torture. Pierce grabbed Carter's arm desperately and wrote, "Captain, no, this is mutiny if you proceed. I will be forced to report this." Carter pulled his arm free and wrote back, "Then report it, but I'm saving those men." He began giving orders in writing, his handwriting bold and decisive. The crew would prepare their emergency air canisters, the kind used for emergency ascents. They'd transfer them to the Soviet submarine through a jury-rigged pressure lock. It would take time. It would be dangerous. But it was possible. Some of the crew hesitated. Carter could hear their thoughts, their doubts, their fear of consequences, fear of prison, fear of being branded traitors. But he could also hear something else, a shift, a reluctant respect. Even in their panic and paranoia, they recognized what he was doing. And despite everything, despite the politics and the Cold War and the hatred between nations, they understood why. Jenkins wrote on the wall, "I'm with you, Captain." Rodriguez wrote below it, "Me too." One by one, the crew wrote their names, volunteers for an operation that could end all their careers. The next 4 hours were the longest of Carter's life, working in silence, communicating only through gestures and hastily scrawled notes. The crew executed a rescue operation that had never been trained for, never been planned for, never been imagined. They maneuvered the Scorpion alongside the Soviet vessel. They aligned the emergency hatches, a delicate operation at this depth. They transferred oxygen canisters one by one through a makeshift airlock system. And all the while, thoughts screamed through their heads. The Soviet crew's gratitude, their disbelief, their shame at needing help from the enemy, their desperate hope that this wasn't a hallucination born of oxygen deprivation. Carter's own crew's conflicting emotions, pride and fear, nobility and doubt, the knowledge that they were doing something right and something that would be called wrong. And underneath it all, the growing realization that the silence zone had done something terrible and beautiful at the same time. It had stripped away every lie, every pretense, every wall between human minds. In this place, you couldn't hide what you were. You couldn't pretend to be better than you were. But you also couldn't deny your shared humanity. Carter heard a Soviet sailor's thought. "My daughter turns 6 next month. I wrote her a letter. It's in my pocket. Will anyone ever give it to her?" He heard another. "I hated Americans. I was taught to hate. But now, I hear their thoughts. They're just like us. Just scared. Just human." After the oxygen transfer was complete, Carter made one more mental transmission to the Soviet crew. "Can you move your submarine? Can you surface?" The response came back. "Da, yes. Engine works. Just no air before. Now we can try." Carter thought carefully. "Then leave this place. Follow our heading in reverse. When sound returns, surface immediately. Tell your command you had mechanical failure, oxygen system malfunction, nothing else. Do not mention us. Understand?" A long pause. Then, "Why? Why you help us?" Carter thought for a moment, choosing his words. His thoughts carefully. Because someday, someone might need to help us, and I hope they will. Because we're all just sailors. The ocean doesn't care about flags. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, Spasibo. Thank you. We will remember. We will never forget this. The Soviet submarine's engines began vibrating. Slowly, painfully, it lifted off the seafloor and turned. Carter ordered the Scorpion to follow at a safe distance, escorting them toward the edge of the silence zone. As they moved through the dark water, the voices in Carter's head began to fade. First, the Soviet thoughts disappeared, growing distant and then silent. Then his own crew's thoughts began to muffle, as if a door was slowly closing between minds. At 1947 hours, sound returned. It started with the engine hum, suddenly audible again. Then the sonar resumed its rhythmic pinging. Men gasped and cried out, hearing their own voices for the first time in nearly 6 hours. Some laughed, some cried, some just stood in stunned silence. The Soviet submarine increased speed and vanished into the dark water ahead, racing toward the surface and safety. Commander Pierce approached Carter at the command station. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd forgotten how to use it. "Sir, what do we report to command?" Carter stared at the empty water where the Soviet submarine had disappeared. He thought about the official report he'd have to file, the questions he'd have to answer, the potential consequences of his actions. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison. But he also thought about what he'd heard in those 6 hours of silence. Every petty hatred, every noble impulse, every human weakness and strength laid bare and undeniable. And he thought about 7 Soviet sailors who would go home to their families. "We report a sonar malfunction in grid reference AX-40, Carter said finally. "Complete acoustic failure. We diverted from course to run diagnostics and avoid navigation hazards. Systems restored after 6 hours. No other vessels encountered. No other incidents." Pierce held his gaze for a long moment. "And if they ask why thermal imaging shows 2 vessels in proximity? Thermal ghost, temperature inversion layer, false reading. Take your pick, Commander. They won't believe it. Maybe not, but they can't prove otherwise." Pierce nodded slowly. Then he said quietly, "For what it's worth, sir, I would have done the same thing, in the end." Carter allowed himself a small smile. "I know, Commander. I heard you thinking it." The Scorpion continued its mission. The logs were carefully filed. The incident was classified and buried in bureaucratic paperwork, officially forgotten. But Carter never forgot what he'd learned in the silence zone. 3 weeks later, Carter received a message through unofficial channels. A single line in broken English transmitted from an unknown source via a neutral Swedish relay station. "7 men breathe because of you. 7 families whole. Spasibo. We remember." Carter burned the message immediately, but he kept the ashes in a small metal tin in his quarters. Months passed. The Cold War continued. Submarines from both sides prowled the same waters. The world remained divided by ideology and fear. But something had changed for Carter. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, he'd stand on the deck when the Scorpion surfaced. He'd listen to the ocean, to the sounds that filled the world, the waves, the wind, the voices of his crew laughing in the mess hall, and he'd remember the place where sound died, and he'd be grateful for every noise he heard. Because in the end, the silence zone had taught him something the Navy never could. That the things we don't say are sometimes more important than the things we do. That privacy is a gift. That the ability to keep our thoughts private allows us to be kind when we feel cruel, to be brave when we feel afraid, to be better than our worst impulses. But also that beneath all the secrets and lies and careful words, we're all the same. All afraid, all flawed, all desperately hoping someone will help us when we're drowning. The ocean kept its secrets, and so did Captain William Ironhand Carter. But on quiet nights, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear those 7 Russian voices thinking one word over and over. Spasibo. Thank you. Spasibo. And he knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Some things are more important than orders. Some things are more important than flags. Some things are simply human.